So soon we should have a new ban list coming to Rush Duel, which I am very excited for. I think ban list season is always a really exciting time because even if the ban list kind of sucks, it at least shakes things up typically and can really just throw a wrench into the game, which a lot of the time you really want. Well, I think one of the worst things to happen to a TCG is when it gets a bit stale, when everything's a little bit samey and nothing really gets mixed up. And I think always being able to mix things up, shake up the meta a little bit is always a really fun time. Looking at the meta right now, I would say that the best decks in the game right now are probably Sevens Wonder Fusion Turbo, specifically with the Sevens Geas, but the other builds are also very, very strong. Sea Serpents, I think specifically the maximum deck is very high roll. It is very oppressive if it gets going, but if it doesn't get going, feels a little bit lackluster because it isn't really doing anything. Sea Serpent mid-range, again, feels like it's a lot more consistent, but again, it's very fair. It's not doing anything super unfair, and it never gets as oppressive, I would say, as the Sea Serpent Maximum build, or specifically the Kraken and Poseidon builds. But the other big boogeyman in the room is probably still Excutie. Now, Excutie, I've noticed, doesn't seem to be as popular as it was. I've seen in a lot of Japanese tournaments, players are still playing it quite a lot, but in a lot of the English tournaments that I've been seeing, people generally just aren't running it. I don't know if that's because we've just gotten bored of it, if it's not particularly fun, but generally I haven't seen as many people playing it, which led me to believe for a little bit that maybe it was kind of a little bit underpowered, but after playing against a few recently, I would say, no, Excutie is still a very, very mean strategy, still very, very strong, and probably even maybe needs to get another hit. But again, there are a lot of cards that now counter Excuties, things like Aquila, which has a really good matchup into them, being able to pop them and being able to attack twice. So, I don't know, maybe they're being kept down enough, we'll have to wait and see. But if we were going to hit Excutie, I think probably... So this is where it gets problematic with Excutie because we've already hit them a few times. And realistically, I think Excutie could probably get away with just playing everything as a one-off. So I've heard a lot of people say the trap cards of Excutie are what kind of pushes them over the top. But recent lists in Japan, we have seen players using just one of each of the traps. So limiting them down to one won't even necessarily hurt them since a lot of the builds are now just running one of each anyway. So my personal hits, if I was going to hit them, would probably be Excutie Flame down to one. This also has a bit of a problem though, because Excutie Flame is really good into Excuties as well as a counter, because you could just ride them in the side deck, special it out when your opponent's playing Excutie, get the boost off of all your opponent's Excuties, and then try and topple them over them that way. So it's a bit of a double-edged blade. But if we do get rid of it, then Excuties lose their best way to deal with things like maximums, because Flame currently is their best way to get enough attack points to just attack over them. So I think Excutie Flame would be, again, limited down to one, I think would be fine. But again, that's if we were looking to hit Excutie. I think the only other thing I might change would be Flower down to one. And the reason for that is just to try and cut off their kind of infinite resource loop. Right now, Excutie is able to just continuously reuse all of their cards again and again and again very, very easily. A lot of other decks kind of have to haphazardly shuffle monsters they want to use again later in the duel back into the deck and then just kind of hope they draw into them. Excutie using Flower is just able to pick and choose whichever ones they want. They turn their graveyard into a toolbox and lets them reuse effects again and again, changing monsters to defense mode, get back Flame so you can attack over big things, bring back the one that pops spell traps so you can just keep popping spell traps. There's just so many good options. So just being able to recur them over and over and over again, I think is really, really strong. So I think Flower to one is also a potential way that we could hit the deck without just trying to outright kill it. As for the other decks that are basically in top tier right now, I still think they're too new. It is typically against Konami's policy to ban out cards that have just come out and where these sets are still selling, because then that will potentially hurt the sales. So I don't think Sevens Wonder Fusion is going to be hit. Obviously, the way they could hit it is to hit some of the older cards, but I don't think they will. I don't think they are going to hit Dragius. I don't think they're going to hit Sevens Road Magician, because again, that would just be kind of silly. I don't think also that they would hit the fusion materials for the others. Again, Gearpods just come out. I think it'd be very strange for them to hit Roadstar Swordsman, as it's just a vanilla. And again, I think you could also play that deck with just one Roadstar Swordsman, it would probably be fine anyway. And I think outright banning it, again, also feels very strange. So I don't know if they would do that. I think what's more likely is we will just kind of sit on this deck, have it around for another format, and then on the next list that we get, we'll see it hit then. And I think we'll see something similar with the Sea Serpents. Again, I think they're all just too new. I think we won't see basically any hits to Sea Serpent. If we do, it would probably be Grand Extreme, because that card is really, really strong. But again, it seems silly to hit a card that counters one of the best decks, because Grand Extreme is fantastic into 7's Wonder Fusion. So right now, they almost kind of are balancing each other, where one has a really good out to the other, and therefore that kind of keeps it in check. The other thing is, I don't think they want to hit cards that are currently really, really powerful in the anime. Right now, the Sea Serpent Maximums are being used by the main antagonist of Yu-Gi-Oh! Go Rush, so I don't think they would want to hit his boss monsters, because I think a lot of people just want to kind of roleplay being him, and they like having that be a thing. I think what's more likely is they will release cards in the next few sets, or maybe a little bit down the line, which can deal with those cards a little bit easier. We'll maybe see those cards be used during the anime to maybe take down Phaser, and then maybe there'll be something we can see there, cards that will just come out that will naturally have an advantage against the Sea Serpent Maximums. So next up, Legends. So Legends is a very interesting subject, because we're basically seeing the same Legends being played over and over and over again. Magic Cylinder is almost a necessary evil, I feel, but a lot of people really hate this card. It can really suck to feel like you've played really, really well, and then you just lose because your opponent has Magic Cylinder. A lot of the time, you have to respect Magic Cylinder, but sometimes you give it too much respect, and if your opponent has any back row and you haven't got a way to deal with it or look at it, such as Sea Dragon Knight, you just don't attack. And that can really suck. You either just kind of say, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to attack anyway, which feels bad because you're basically just hoping they don't have it, or you have to sit there and respect it and just play very passively until you draw the Lurkers, your Ghost Cyclone, your in-archetype spell trap removal to get rid of it, or to at least look at it so you know it's not Magic Cylinder, so you can actually get in and attack. So I don't know if Magic Cylinder would get hit. I think a lot of people hate it. But again, I think it is very, very important, because a lot of the most powerful decks at the moment just want to summon out a giant guy and try and kill you. Seven's Geas, a power bonded Cyber Twin Dragon, Guilford boosted by Pure Glass Spears. Just all of these cards are just summon out giant guys, slap your opponent to death. And Magic Cylinder, I think, is probably the best way to deal with that, especially since after Mirror Force was so strong, we started getting a load of cards printed that just basically said, gain protection from trap cards. This card can't be destroyed by trap cards. This card can't be killed by effects during your turn. Because of all of those protections, people stopped playing Mirror Force. So unless we got a lot more protections for Magic Cylinder, I don't see anything else happening there. I think one good way to deal with Magic Cylinder possibly would be to release a similar card to Magic Cylinder that isn't Magic Cylinder. Maybe Negate Attack as a legend, or something else that can just stop an attack but without doing the massive burn damage back to your opponent. Maybe again, something like Negate Attack might be really good, because again, it stops the battle phase, which means if they have a multi-attacker, you're not going to get punished for just like only being able to stop one attack. So maybe, but until that, I wouldn't say Magic Cylinder is going to get hit. The next one's Dark Hole. Dark Hole, very, very powerful. Again, it's tricky, especially because a lot of the Dark Galaxy cards do use Dark Hole for their effects. They get to recycle it, they get bonus effects of Dark Holes in the graveyard, so it's tricky to try and hit this card. It is very, very powerful, but it also acts as an equalizer. A lot of decks right now can kind of just summon this enormous thing or set up a really, really powerful board, and Dark Hole is a very good way to just kind of out it. But again, it can feel very similar to Magic Cylinder, where if your opponent doesn't make trap cards, or if they have very limited traps, and your opponent plays Dark Hole, it can feel like a bit of a sweep. Your opponent got lucky, they topped that Dark Hole, they wiped your board, they killed you. But again, that's just how Rush goes sometimes, right? So no, I don't think Dark Hole is going to get hit, but I think if a Legend spell was going to get hit, I think Dark Hole would be the one. Next up, Zaborg. Zaborg, very, very powerful. Again, I don't think Zaborg's going to get hit. I don't think there's a reason to. I think it's still kind of new. I think it's very good, but it's not overpowered. I think we're seeing a lot of use from Zaborg now, but again, I don't think it's going to get hit. Next up, Power Bond. Again, Power Bond almost makes the Cyber Dragon deck. You don't need to play Power Bond in it, but it makes the ceiling of that deck so much higher. It also adds this kind of risk factor, which can be very exciting. Again, I don't think Power Bond is going to get hit, because again, Cyber Dragon is a fan favorite deck. I think even when it slips down to like a tier 3 deck, people are still going to be playing it because they just love Cyber Dragon. I mean, who doesn't love Cyber Dragon? Cyber Dragon's so cool. So yeah, I don't think they're going to hit Power Bond. And then the last one I want to talk about is Vanity's Fiend. Again, it's a Floodgate. Floodgates can be annoying, but again, Floodgates do allow the lower tier decks to fight with the big boys. And again, all of the really best decks right now all want to special summon, so Vanity's Fiend can be really, really powerful into them. The only reason I could see to get rid of Vanity's Fiend is just if they want those more powerful decks, again, that are kind of anime-style decks, well, and Excutie, to flourish, and if they don't want Floodgates keeping them down. But I don't think that's going to be the case, so I think Vanity Fiend is also not going to get hit. The next card I want to talk about is Mirror Innovator. I don't think Mirror Innovator is overpowered per se. I think it's very, very strong. It's a very, very good tool for kind of a Cyber Dragon or just a machine mid-range deck to gain piercing or gain a lot of attack. I think it's a very, very fun card. I think realistically it will be played until the end of time, until it literally gets power crept by something that's just better. But again, I don't think they're going to hit it. I don't think machines are enough of a threat that it needs to be hit. I just think it's a good enough card that it was worth talking about because it is a very, very strong card. But again, don't think it's going to hit. And that also goes for Inferno Fire Blast. We've seen this uptick in people playing Dragon Burn, and specifically playing a lot of cards that just kind of do a lot of like little mini burn damage, like the new fusion material that Dragon's got, as well as the Infernal Fire Blast with the Red Eyes Black Dragon. A lot of people have been starting to use these kind of burn tactics, which I think it's amusing. And it's a bit strange because I typically am not a big fan of burn decks, but in Rush, burn deck feels so foreign, it feels so weird that I'm kind of for it. I kind of like the idea of there being a burn deck in Rush because it doesn't happen often. I don't think it's going to happen often in the future, and it's not like a stool burn. It's kind of this interesting, I'm going to try and blarg you to death with lots of Inferno Fire Blasts, which I think is actually kind of fun. Again, I don't think it's going to be hit, but we've been seeing an uptick of decks using this and these kind of Red Eyes decks, so thought I'd talk about it. Next up, we have just the kind of staples. These are a lot of cards that I think some people have been talking about maybe limiting because they're just played in every deck. I think what it is Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game where you can put any card in any deck, but typically the way that the cards are written kind of incentivizes you to use specific types. So for example, to use Dark Revelation, you want to have a deck full of spellcasters, right? You don't have to have it 100% spellcasters, but you want to have a lot of spellcasters. And I think a lot of these cards are good enough and generic enough that you can play them in just about anything. And that's why maybe they're being talked about a lot. So those cards being Lurker. Now Lurker, again, very, very powerful. 2600 defense, can pop back row, can burn your opponent for 1000. Really, really good. Put it back in your hand, discard it with Ship the 7 Treasures, gain 2 cards. Really, really good. Really, really, really good card. Again, it's another card like Magic Cylinder that people complain about. They're like, I don't like playing against this card. Everyone's playing this card. It's in every deck. Blah, 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 blah. Very, very strong card. Again, I don't see a point in hitting it because I don't think there's a reason to ban it. And most people are running it at 1 anyway. So I don't think limiting it would do anything. It's just kind of there. And I think we're going to just be in a Lurker world for a bit. Again, if they did ban it, I don't think it would be the end of the world. It would kind of hurt zombies a little bit, I guess, but I mean, zombies is a fun deck, but I don't think it necessarily needs the Lurker. So yeah, I don't think they're going to hit Lurker, but you never know, they might. Next up, Sea Dragon Knight. Again, Sea Dragon Knight is generic enough, and it's been played almost pretty much since its release. I think people have been like, oh, I could just play this in anything. It's decent enough. You know, it can shuffle cards back into your deck, which can be really useful. You can potentially pop back row. You can just look at your opponent's face downs and then just decide to pop them with like your own Lurker or with your Ghost Cyclone or with your in-archetype spell trap removal. So just really generically good card. Again, I don't think this card would be hit, but again, I also don't think putting it down to 1 would be the end of the world. So I don't think it's going to get hit realistically. Next up, Jamais Vu. Jamais Vu is, again, really, really cool. Being able to recycle spells is very rare. There are not many cards that shuffle spell cards from your graveyard back into your deck. There's only a handful. And Jamais Vu is a really, really good one because also gives you a draw. And it's not a tribute monster, so you can summon it out, get a draw, and then tribute it off. You've put 2 spells back in your deck, which generally you hope to draw into, or they're just really good spells. You've plussed off of it, and you've tributed a monster. So it's just really, really good. Just really, really good card. Again, I don't know if this card should be banned. I don't think it's like game-breakingly powerful. It's just a really strong card. I think maybe this card could go to 1. I don't think that hurts any deck too much, and I think that would actually be fine. I'd quite like to see this card get down to 1, I think. Next up, Pot of Arrogance. Pot of Arrogance is a very interesting card because it stops you from playing spells for the rest of the turn. This can be annoying if your main combo involves spells. So I think a lot of fusion decks aren't going to want to play this, and any kind of deck that runs just a surplus of spell cards probably doesn't want to use Pot of Arrogance. But the main reason Pot of Arrogance is really cool is because it doesn't force you down a specific axis. It doesn't force you specifically onto level 7s, or level 8s, or level 10s, or level 6s. It basically says, if you're using a mix of all of these, then play Pot of Arrogance. And I think that's kind of where it's quite happy to sit. I think it's cool to have a card that doesn't require you to be down an axis, but has a drawback as well. So I think it's fine. Again, I don't think Pot of Arrogance should be restricted in any way, but it could go down to 1. And again, I think that would kind of suck for a lot of the more interesting decks. Like, Sea Serpent Midrange really likes this card, and it would suck to hurt that deck, so I would like to just see it stay at 3, I think. Next up, Ship of the Seven Treasures. I mean, again, it's the best of the draw spells, I feel, because you can use it on level 7s to get a bonus effect, or just use it on anything and just get a single draw. Ship of the Seven Treasures is really, really good. Again, I don't like the idea of hitting this card, because hitting consistency in kind of, especially generic consistency, kind of sucks. Obviously, it would be better, I think, if a lot of the archetypes had more in-archetype or more in-type consistency tools. But outside of that, I think Ship of the Seven Treasures should stay. I think it's a really cool tool, and getting rid of it kind of sucks. Nobody's Scat Thief. Again, another just really good consistency tool. I don't think this card should be hit either, but we have seen an uptick in the number of decks playing this card and the quantities. Some decks are even running 3 of this card now, even though it's kind of can fall victim to Sea Dragon Knight. And that's because it's just such a powerful effect. Draw 3, discard 3 can just be fantastic on its own, but also being able to blank damage from level 8 and lower monsters is also really, really good. So Nobody's Scat Thief. Again, I think this card's also too new, so I don't think it's going to get hit. But in the future, I could maybe see this going to 1, because a lot of decks are going to play this at 2 and 3, so I think going down to 1's probably good for this card. But again, I don't think it'll get hit on the next list. Next up, Ghost Cyclone. So Ghost Cyclone, again, I would hate to see this card hit, because I think it's really cool. But basically, this is the spell trap removal you use if you are playing a large mix of types. The main deck that I've seen playing this card is the Sevens Geas Turbo, and that's because that deck wants to run just a crap ton of different types. Playing mixed types is very fun. I don't think it's necessarily good for the game to be pigeonholed into just playing a single type, even though I think that is also kind of fun in its own way. I like having the choice and being able to do what I want with it. So I think Ghost Cyclone is fine. It's also a really good going second tool. You can just side them in and just have potentially a way to pop your opponent's back row and get a free draw, which is pretty cool. But the last one is Amazing Dealer. So Amazing Dealer is really, really cool. Again, really good consistency tool, and that is why I would hate to see this card hit, because I think in Rush, the most annoying thing that can happen is you can brick. And any card that basically stops you from bricking, makes it less likely, or can fix your bricked hand, I am all for keeping. So I think Amazing Dealer needs to stay. The only problem I would say with this card is it almost feels like you can't not run it, because being able to fix your hand is really, really good. So it makes deck building a little bit more boring, because I feel like I'm almost always just running at least 2 of this card. But yeah, Amazing Dealer, keep it at 3. So looking at cards that are currently on the ban list, I think realistically, a lot of the cards that are currently there should probably stay there. Barrier Statue of the Inferno is a Floodgate. Floodgates, again, can be really good to allow the weaker decks to keep up with the stronger decks. But overall, I think Floodgates generally aren't the way to go. I think there are better ways to deal with problem decks, like hitting them outright or releasing cards that just counter them. I don't think just a straight up Floodgate is the most healthy way to do it, so I quite like Barrier Statue staying at 1. Dragon Roll the Sushi Fairy, again, if there are any kind of infinite loops and kind of loop-based shenanigans, I generally am not a huge fan of it, so again, I'm quite happy for that to stay where it is. Excutie Lilius, again, that deck is still putting up ridiculous numbers. Excuties is still a really unbelievably powerful deck, so I think bringing back their main kind of smash beat stick is probably not the way to go, so I think that should definitely stay. Necromade Nana, again, Necromade Nana is a very fun card, but again, it creates these weird loop scenarios, so again, keep it on there. Thunderbolt is a weird one. I think I like Thunderbolt where it is. I don't really want this card unrestricted, just because I think Thunderbolt, basically, when Thunderbolt is good, it's too good. I think realistically, this card is probably fine. It could probably come off fine, and I don't think Thunderbolt would become like a serious meta threat. But if it did, it would become very, very dominant, and that's something I really don't want to deal with. I guess it comes down to how many very, very powerful level 7 monsters get released in the future, because as soon as they get released, Thunderbolt's power increases alongside them, so I quite like Thunderbolt being as a one-of, because there are still things people can do, like the new Wonderbolt deck that we've been seeing a bit of play, which is the Wonder Fusion plus Thunderbolt kind of combination, and I think that deck's pretty cool. I don't necessarily think we need it to be more than 1. Next up, Excutie Scramble. Again, I think Excutie probably needs another hit, so definitely not taking any Excutie cards off the list. Magical Stone Excavation. It's a really weird one. I think keeping it at 1 is probably for the best, again, to try and prevent any kind of loop shenanigans that could happen in the future. But any deck that's running it is only playing it at 1 anyway, so I think it's fine to just keep it at 1, because I don't think anyone's really going to want to use more than 1 of it unless they're trying to break the card, so I think it's fine. And then Secret Order, again. Secret Order, I really did not like Rush as much when secret order decks were a thing. Like Gate Order, I think was just really boring. I didn't like the era of just normal monster spam. So again, I'm quite happy if secret order stays where it is. And then Progress Potter, again, I'm also quite happy for it to stay where it is. I think 2 is a good number for this card. I don't think we need to go up any more. Progress Potter is fine as is. Again, we don't want any of these loops. Loops bad, at least in my opinion. In my opinion, loops bad. So if we look at my wish list, it would probably be Flame to 1. I think that's what I would like to see. I would like to see Flower to 1. I think you could move the Excutie traps down to 1, but again, I don't think that matters. So it almost feels like a token gesture. So, I mean, you could do it, I guess. I think that's kind of it. I think Excutie is the only deck that I personally am not a huge fan of. There are a couple of other decks which are really good, but I don't think they are ban worthy. I think the meta is in an okay place right now. I think there are at least 3 or 4 decks which are kind of fighting for like being the top spot or just all kind of tier 1. Maybe there is a little bit gap between the top of tier 1 and the bottom of tier 1, but they both feel like they're all still in the same tier. And tier 2 feels quite healthy as well. I think there is a lot of decks you can bring to a tournament and do quite well with. Cyber Dragon just feels like a really fantastic tier 2 deck. I don't think we basically need to hit any of these cards. So I think right now Rush is probably actually a pretty good place, but that is coming from the perspective of someone who really likes 7's Wonder Fusion. So take that with a pinch of salt because I might be a little bit biased. As for my predictions, I think Excuties have been putting up a lot of results in Japan. Japan is primarily obviously where Rush Duel is played, and Konami are from Japan. I think they'll look at those results and maybe think that it's time to hit something. So I could see Flame, maybe Flower going down to 1. I could also see the traps going down to 1 as well. The only other things I would say is, I don't think they're going to hit the new cards that have come out. So I don't think we're going to see a 7's Wonder Fusion or any of the Sea Serpents hit. I could see Grand Extreme getting hit, but I would be disappointed if it did. I do think Grand Extreme is a pretty cool card. I would not like to see it hit. I could also see things like Jamais Vu getting hit, because again, it's not broken, but it's just used in everything. And I think when you get to that stage, it's like, maybe we should hit this card just because of usage rate, but I don't know. It's hard to predict anything like that. And yeah, I think that's kind of it. I don't think we're going to see a huge list. I don't realistically think we need one. I think, like I said, I think the game is in a pretty good spot at the moment. I think maybe if people really don't like Wonder Fusion, or they really don't like Sea Serpents, and like the Maximum specifically, I guess, then maybe they won't like the current iteration of Rush. Maybe for them, the competitive scene is not for them right now. But for someone that really does like those sort of things, I think it's a really cool meta. The only thing I don't like right now is Excutie, and I think realistically they are going to get another hit. We'll have to see if my prediction's right. But yeah, thanks for watching.